Hey everyone, Thomas here, and today we're doing a quick review on the Skimz MBR Macroalgae Reactor. Yeah! In sump refugium messiness and light spill, no longer a thing. Also, at a price that most reefers are going to be able to afford. And also, DC controllable pump so you can tune it. Skimz nailed this one. Using macroalgae like chaeto is one of the easiest ways to export large amounts of nutrients like nitrate and phosphate from your aquarium. Many sumps available today have a designated chamber to utilize as a refugium for growing macroalgae, but still require you to purchase a light capable of growing macroalgae quickly, and usually don't do the best job of isolating the light, meaning light spill into the rest of the sump, which can cause unwanted algae growth, meaning more maintenance. Getting algae growth inside your skimmer is just... nobody wants that. Or maybe you have a simple sump, either a prefab that is basically just water in, single chamber, pair of baffles and water out, or even just a homemade sump from a glass aquarium, and you want to use chaeto for nutrient export but don't have a separate chamber to dedicate to a refugium. And for these reasons, the macroalgae or chaeto reactor was born, and there are a lot of options out there ranging from really expensive all the way down to DIY. They all work on the same basic principles, so what makes the Skimz MBR Macroalgae Reactor stand out from the crowd? To find out, let's get it out of the box. In the box, you'll find the MBR reactor, the QP 1.2 Skimz Quiet Pro DC pump, the pump controller, the pump power supply, the LED light tube, the LED power supply, the macroalgae clips, and some lubricant for your O-rings. So what makes these reactors so great? Well, to start off, the Skimz MBR Macroalgae Reactors come with everything you need to grow macroalgae right out of the box, so you don't need to get anything extra. It has a light, it's got a pump, and for a price that most reefers are actually going to be able to afford, it's actually less expensive than some of the higher-end LED options for refugiums that are out there. And it's pretty easy to set up. Setup is straightforward. Disassemble the reactor and install the pump in the bottom portion of the body, lubricate the O-rings, install the algae clips on the trays, connect the pump to the controller, slide the light tube down the center of the reactor, add a couple golf ball sized pieces of chaeto or your preferred macroalgae, place it in your sump, and plug in the power supplies and you're off to the races. The Skimz Macroalgae Reactors were actually built with a lot of thought and are more than just a tube of water with a light in the middle. The pump included with the reactor is DC controllable, so you can effectively tune the amount of nutrient export to match your system requirements by decreasing the flow to remove less nitrate and phosphate or increasing it to remove more. Which is necessary because, as Ryan and Randy have shown in the past, sometimes chaeto can work too well. The light tube that comes with the Skimz reactor is built specifically for macroalgae growth, containing photo red, blue, and daylight LEDs. Because the LEDs are right next to the chaeto, they can be lower wattage and still provide enough PAR for rapid growth. Skimz also took the light a step further, and instead of including a basic acrylic or standard glass sleeve, they've opted to use a quartz sleeve as it allows for the most amount of light to pass through to the macroalgae or chaeto. Keep in mind though, quartz is fairly fragile, so be careful come maintenance time. But I mean, if you do have an oopsie and fumble the light, no big deal, because replacements are available. I mean, don't break it though. The sides of the reactor are smoked, so you can still see when the light is on and still get a rough idea of how thick that chaeto might be inside of the reactor, while not allowing any light spill into your sump, which means no unwanted algae building up in places it shouldn't, like your skimmer, media reactor, in between your baffles, other places you don't want algae to grow that's hard to get it out of. I like it. The reactor is quite slender, like me, thanks to its internal pump, and requires only a 7" by 7" footprint for the 127 model and roughly 8" by 8" footprint for the 157, which is around the same size as a compact skimmer, so even if you have a relatively small sump and you're tight on space, these reactors should squeeze right in. They are, however, internal or in-sump only reactors, so if you don't have room in your sump, you're going to need to look for an external option to suit your needs. Maintenance is easy. The reactor comes apart in two places, at the top for periodic harvesting of the macroalgae, as well as at the bottom for when it's time to clean out the reactor as a whole. Some of us out there might find the O-ring a tad tight or difficult to reseat, but with a little practice, it's no issue. Another consideration is that if you have a particularly short stand or not a lot of clearance in your stand, you do need around 27.5 inches to access the top of the reactor while it's sitting in your sump if you want to be able to trim the chaeto without taking the entire reactor out. I think for most people that's not going to be an issue. A lot of modern day stands are going to give you at least that amount of clearance or even more. I also want to point out that the riser pipe at the top of the reactor doesn't have a cover, so it can get clogged with a little bit of macroalgae over time. It's a good idea every time you harvest to also clean that out. You could take it a step further by covering it with some sort of filter mesh and some zip ties, or even some coarse foam sponge, but again, just got to make sure you clean it out so that it doesn't impede the flow. So what size do you need for your tank? The 127 is rated for up to 100 gallons, and the 157 is rated up to 180 gallons. But when it comes to macroalgae reactors, going a little bit bigger can be better. That way you know you've got enough room to grow the amount of chaeto required to meet the demands of your tank. Remember, it is tunable with the use of that included DC pump, so you can reduce the amount of flow going through reactor, which in turn will reduce the amount of nutrient export to match your system. If your goal is to use chaeto or macroalgae as your main source of nutrient export, I highly recommend checking out our refugium playlist right here. I particularly love the top refugium fails video, and I love the refugium testing series that shows just how well chaeto and macroalgae can work. So yeah, knowledge up. Go for it. Binge watch the whole thing. I did it. Be like me. Or not. Good stuff.